Okay, so my name is Anna Patalano, and today's October 4th, Tuesday, 2022. And I am today recording a conversation with Peter Dudek, who is on the other side of the screen. And we're going to talk about different projects that Peter is involved with. Presently, he is an artist, as I am. And I'll have Peter introduce himself a little bit more fully. So take it away, Peter.
Yeah, Heidi. Yeah, we met at Skowhegan a number of years ago, and Skowhegan was really kind of a launching pad for my career in many ways. It helped me figure stuff out, and so almost as soon as I got back to New York, I did this sculpture that really got me going for a whole series of work, and I'm pretty much known as a sculptor because of those moments before and slightly after Skowhegan, and a few years after I graduated from the master's program at Hunter, I started teaching at SVA. So I teach also. So I've been teaching since the late 20th century, is what I like to say, and so I'm primarily known as a sculptor and someone who teaches at SVA and at Hunter now. But I also have other projects I'm working on, non-sculptural, I would say, that I would very much like to talk about. A couple of books I'm working on, for example. One a kind of memoir about adjunct teaching, and the other one an artist book.
Oh, really? I didn't know about the second book.
Yeah.
What artist book meaning what?
Well, what it is exactly is, I collect old catalogs about exhibitions and stuff, primarily related to sculpture. And so there's one catalog I've had for a number of years called Sculpture 1951, and it's a catalog for a Met exhibition.
Oh.
And so it's a big group show of sculpture, and it's aged now. It's like 70 years old now. So and I keep on looking at that catalog. And so it's in the public domain now, so I can take it and do anything I want with it. And one thing I liked about it is because it's aged, the images from one side of the page started bleeding to the other side. So it was not only a document, but it was a live document. It was performing over time. The images were evolving. And the interesting thing about the show was that the curator claimed that at that time, 1951, American sculpture was less likely to be abstract. That painting was more likely to be abstract.
Oh, wow.
Right, which is not really our historical understanding, I think,
it's not.
of the moment. And of course, David Smith's in the show. He's a prominent. There's a piece featured prominently in the catalog, and Calder's in the show, and a lot of other people who worked abstract. But in the catalog, there's a surprising amount of figurative work, and it's really weird figurative work too. You wouldn't expect that kind of work to be made in 1951 in the United States. But what's happened over time is they've become abstract, the images, because the image from the back side of that page bled through.
So
it's morphed. It's a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided to scan the book and republish it in this state, But when I scanned it, it picked up the front page, the back of that page, and then it picked up the third page, which I didn't expect.
Mm-hmm.
But the intensity of the scanner picked up a third layer.
Oh,
and
cool.
so that process of scanning amplified the abstraction, And so I've got it more or less laid out. I've got all the pages scanned, and I hope to print it by this winter.
Now, are you going to self-publish it?
Yeah, it's going to be an artist book. I'm just going to do it myself. Yep.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So where was this? You said the catalog from 1951, but the show itself, where was that?
It was at the Metropolitan.
It was at the Met. Okay.
Yeah, so it was a big review of American sculpture of that day.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is very interesting that the curator at the time made that assessment, that felt that more sculpture at the time would be representational than abstract.
Right. Yeah. The painting led the way in abstraction, not sculpture. Yeah.
Hmm. How do you, I mean, our understanding of sculpture within art history of that time is not that, is different. So how do you feel about that assessment? I mean, what do you think?
Well, it was surprising to hear that. In fact, if you see the movie Painters Painting, that documentary, I don't know if you ever watched that.
I have.
Yeah, there's a sculptor. I think his name's Philip Pavia in there, and he and his work has figurative representational aspects to it, and he was saying that painters were constantly telling him to chop the head off the sculpture, that he wasn't abstract enough. So maybe there's some truth to it, that the sculptors at that time were more reluctant, because he carved stone, this guy,
Right.
and so he was getting a lot of pressure from his painter friends
Mhm.
to be more reductive.
Right, right.
And there's a lot of carving in the catalog.
There is.
Yeah, a lot of carving.
Maybe perhaps it was the nature of the medium or the different mediums that the sculptors worked with that maybe lent themselves more to representational imagery.
Yeah, the people who were working with metal were more abstract,
Hmm.
clearly. I mean, there's some cast bronze, I believe, but whatever welding is going on, there's very little figurative elements into it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So the book and how you sort of have envisioned the sort of bleeding into one another, how the different images from the different pages are kind of melding together. Are you looking at those images as being just for what they are, or are you seeing potential in terms of envisioning those images in 3 dimensions? Like, do you sort of connect it to your own sculpture?
No, not right now. What I see coming out of the book, and I've got a kind of book release thing planned at a bookstore, and so the idea is I'll have the book. I'll have like poster size prints of like all the pages. Like on one poster, there might be like 20 of the pages, another poster, another 20 of the pages, etc. And then I'll have individual prints. You could I'll edition certain pages, just a page. So I see this movie being more of a print edition, and then I might take certain images and separately from the book work on the layering more and distort it more and change it more.
Okay.
But probably not. I probably won't do that within the book. I'll try to keep the 3 layering thing that I discovered intact, and then mess with it more on my own later. At least that's what I see it as now. Although, like I said, I'm working on multiple platforms now, my sculpture and writing and artist book and stuff. I do see myself, and I'm very low tech now, very hands-on. I am seeing myself wanting to play with some 3D printing, as and to incorporate it into a sculpture.
Okay.
It's mostly not 3D printed. But
Right.
some elements will be.
So, but you mentioned you're going to have some kind of like a release date do you have that date? Do you know what it is?
No, I don't have an exact date, but I want the book to be printed this winter, and so February is what we're shooting for.
Okay. Well, good. I mean, we'll find a way to announce that too. Maybe we could do another video chat where you're actually like introducing the book and give more details about the release date and so forth.
Right.
It sounds like a very interesting project. I had no idea actually that show at that time sounds like it was a very prominent exhibition.
Yeah, it was at the Met.
Yeah. Wow. So, do you want to as sort of like a lead in terms of like this thinking about the sculpture in your own work and sculpture with the show from this catalog? Do you want to look at some of your own work on your website? Do you want to do that now, or do you want to talk about the other book that you're working on?
We could talk about the other book, and then also, am I able to share the screen also, or is it just you?
I can actually, you can share the screen if I make you the host, which I can do.
Okay.
So when we're ready to do that, I can do that.
Okay. Well, it's only that I'm redoing this site because the most recent stuff is not on the site. But we can talk about the older stuff. That's not an issue. But
Whatever.
yeah, we could talk about the other book, the one I'm writing,
Yes.
which is called "Did I Do That? 30 Years of Adjunct Teaching." Yes, it's a confessional. I did do that. Guilty. And I'm still doing that. It's over 30 years now. And by the time I finish the book, it's going to be probably a couple more. Although my goal is to finish it a year from now, and to find a publisher by then. And if not, I'll just self-publish it. But it started because, well, it started in two ways. First of all, for years, once you teach for a few decades, you have stories to tell, right? Students doing projects that went totally off the grid,
Mhm.
and also just how teaching evolved. And so I was telling these stories for years. Then a little more than a year ago, I got contacted by someone I knew a little asking if I wanted to be on a panel that's been organized by this organization called FATE, F-A-T-E,
Mhm.
which I had never heard of, that organization. It had something to do with foundation teaching. And so the panel was to be about how you prepare graduate students, for teaching. So right now I'm only teaching undergrad. So, I don't even teach an MFA program. I teach in a BFA. And so my thinking was, well, I don't do that, but instead I'm going to propose talking about how I first got my job,
Mhm.
which I thought was probably more of interest to them, actually. I mean, lots of people get an MFA. How many of them get a teaching job?
Correct.
So I did that, and it was kind of culled from various stories that I've told over the years. And so it happened. The conference happened. I did my thing, and then realized I wanted to do something more with it, that this could grow, and so I knew Sharon Butler, right, painter, and the one who has the blog Two Coats of Paint.
Mhm.
And I think we probably had done a couple uh, what are those things, the online conversations, you know what I'm talking about. We were just talking about it's like being on live radio, the
Oh,
conversation.
Clubhouse.
Clubhouse, right? That's what it is. So I did a couple of those with her, I think, at the time, and so we talked about doing something with my writing, and so she agreed to post it on Two Coats of Paint, but add images,
Mhm.
and she dug up some interesting images of the Jersey Highway under construction, because my talk for Fate started with the Tony Smith ride on the unfinished New Jersey Highway, and it took it off from there, because he was still teaching when I was in graduate school at Hunter, So she published that, got a good response, and I had already kind of kicked around some other chapters, and then I suddenly gave myself, okay, I'm gonna give myself the goal to write as many chapters about this book as possible in 1 year. And the goal was kind of do a similar amount of writing to my thesis, because I did a master's degree where you had to write a thesis,
Mhm.
like 70 pages. So I did that, and so that's where I'm at now with the book. So in theory, the book is half written, and I have an editor who's kicked those pages around. I have to go back and kind of tweak them, and I've conceptually laid out much of the rest of the book, right?
Mhm.
So it's a combination of how my teaching has evolved, how I got hired in the first place, how the teaching has evolved, how the students have evolved, some of the weird things that totally went wrong, what's being an adjunct like, you know, but it's all really from a personal point of view. So it's kind of a memoir, right?
Mm.
So, but it's going to be about adjunct teaching without relying on data. And because so many articles about adjunct teaching are written by journalists, and they put a lot of data into it,
Mm.
and it's really not from the personal view. And it's depressing as hell, terrible. Titles like "Death of an Adjunct" and stuff.
Yes, I've seen them. Yes.
So I try to, talk about the real, clearly.
Mhm.
They're paid less than full-time faculty. They get fewer benefits, yada yada. But you do get some of that. You get some benefits, you get some pay, but you're juggling. You're really part of the gig economy. But also, certain things grew in my work through teaching. Because when I left school, it had been implanted in my head, at least I believed it had been, that artists had multiple roles to play. Of course, you make your work, but you had a role to play in writing about the work, curating the work,
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera. You weren't just in the studio, and teaching has helped me to grow all of that. So there's going to be a chapter in curating, probably more than one chapter because I put together quite a few shows, and sprinkled with my writing, et cetera. So although there's a downside to being an adjunct, there's also, I have to acknowledge that certain things did happen that were to my benefit.
Well, I mean, as a teacher, also as a teacher, I think any any context that gives you the opportunity to teach, especially if you're in a somewhat serious program where people are there and they really want to learn, um, will do that at its essence, regardless of what the circumstances are. It could be like a regular full-time job. It could be adjunct. It could be teaching in an arts center, which is what I do. Regardless of the environment, I think, if it sounds like if you weren't invested in just teaching because you seem to enjoy it, uh, you wouldn't have such an optimistic view of the fact that you were teaching within the adjunct world.
Right.
Is that correct? I mean, do you like it?
Right.
Sounds like you really enjoy doing it anyway.
I enjoy teaching. But I also know that it's important to keep certain limits on your teaching. Some people try to earn all their income through teaching,
Mm.
and that did not work for me as an adjunct. Some teaching at multiple schools, multiple classes. Uh, that was too chaotic. And too much work, quite frankly. Uh, so also right out of grad school, I understood that I had to have multiple income streams available, and they could be, you know, anything from working for an artist or a gallery or opening your own business or, selling your work, et cetera. You had to be able to shift gears because you're entering a gig economy.
Right, right, exactly.
So that's what I did, and all of that's going to be in the book. Yeah.
So I'm just curious. I mean, if we could, without, I mean, the book is going to come out and then we'll have the opportunity to read the book. I'm certainly interested in, because I like talking to other teachers and what their experiences are. And I agree that after many years of teaching, a lot of the teaching can be done through expressing anecdotal experiences to the students.
Right.
There's a lot to be learned, I think, just in terms of what we experienced, in those experiences, and then how we relay that experience to students. But I'm curious to know from you how you have seen students change over the years.
Well, the unique thing about being an adjunct in my case is that even though I've taught for 30 years, it's really been just two schools. I mean, I've had visiting gigs at a couple other schools, but usually when you're teaching for so long, you taught many different schools, you know. So I've been lucky enough just to teach at 2 schools in New York City, you know, and in close proximity to each other, all that kind of stuff. Now, the 2 schools are very different from each other. You know, School of Visual Arts is an art school, straight up, you know. Hunter College is a liberal arts school. So just by definition, you get different students, you know.
Right.
And so in the undergrad level, I've found that SVA, you know, I see students going on to do stuff right out of undergrad, you know. Whereas at Hunter, it's a little different. It's usually they go to the MFA program and then go on to stuff, you know.
Mhm.
Not that the SVA people don't go on to MFA, sometimes they do, but the programs were intensive, I would say, and therefore you get a higher number of ambitious students coming out of undergrad at SVA. That's just been my experience, you know.
Yeah.
The other thing, the population has totally changed, you know. SVA, when I started in the late 20th century, the population was mostly city, you know. Then it became more suburban, and then it just keeps on going out, reaching for students.
Mhm.
And whereas Hunter has mostly remained a city school,
Mhm.
and very much immigrant population, you know, or generation away from it, et cetera.
Yes.
Uh, you know, a lot of people kind of working their way through school, that sort of thing. I'd say a higher percentage than the SVA, that sort of thing.
So have you, within those two different environments, have you seen the the type of student, you know, in terms of how they assimilate information that they're being taught? Have you seen it change over the years?
Well, the thing I would say that when you say I teach foundation and advanced at sculpture at SVA. Hunter, I'm more of a utility player. You know, in baseball, the utility player can play first base, outfield, you
Mhm.
know. So that's how I see my role. And so I've taught drawing and sculpture uh, everything except painting, it seems like. But at SVA, it was mostly concentrated on sculpture, you know, and so there I was able to work more intensely with people who kind of focused on sculpture, you know.
Mhm.
Whereas Hunter, not so much so, you know. But also, and I hate to be just trying to promote SVA.
No, it's all right.
Okay, but the when you're in an upper level class at SVA, the students seem to already have a certain engagement with the history of art,
Mhm.
you know, going to galleries, that sort of thing, familiarity with stuff. Whereas Hunter, it's there to a certain extent, but I have to get them out there a little more. I have to make more of an effort to get them out there.
I see. Have you, maybe it's different, you know, I've noticed a difference in how students process information over the years, and maybe it's different if you teach sculpture versus teaching a two-dimensional medium, which in my case would be painting and drawing. You know, traditionally, that, you know, that's what I've always taught. But I have noticed, when, especially if it's a younger student, that their ability to focus and concentrate is different than it used to be, you know, 20 or 30 years ago. And so I find that that's a big, you know, a big change. And also their desire to find the quickest, shortest way possible to get to the end result has been my experience. Um, you know, so like, you know, like when you're trying to explain to somebody, well, you really should learn how to mix color and understand color theory, you know, as a painter, uh, it 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 doesn't quite always sink in. I mean, not with everybody, but I do see that with younger people, they seem to be a bit more resistant to really taking the time to learn that, and understanding how they see color in this particular instance. So it's challenging. It is very challenging. I'm not sure if because sculpture involves actual, three-dimensional materials, and you're physically more engaged with your whole body in the process of making sculpture. Perhaps that's not so much the case. I don't know.
Right. Well, in terms of attention spans, if they could just not be on their phone, you know.
Right.
When I was a student, I think the biggest fear of faculty, say especially in a lecture class, is students falling asleep.
Mhm.
And now they're on their phone.
Mhm.
They're not asleep,
Right.
because they don't want to miss something that's on their phone.
Right. That's right.
And so this is a problem when you're teaching sculpture and walking into the wood shop looking at the phone. And I explain, it's a difficult transition from your phone to the bandsaw.
Yes.
It's a very difficult transition. You don't want to make that transition. Okay.
Right.
So there's a safety issue
Yeah.
in sculpture that the phone seriously creates. The interesting thing, though, in terms of technology, is that it's put an emphasis on craft again.
Mhm.
Whereas for years it seemed like make it well enough to get your idea across and then move on to something else.
Mhm.
Don't obsess. There was no fetish finish thing going on. It was mostly a conceptual thing. But digital, because it's so specific in a way, and so clean in a way sometimes, that it seems like surface and craft has been re-emphasized to the extent that they think they're finished once a 3D print happens, and it's like, no, yeah, okay, yes, but no, you're not finished. That's not it. There's nothing there except something 3D printed. No, that's not it. So there's that you have to handle with.
Well, the other thing that I find, I mean, there are pros and cons to everything, and with the access to digital imagery, certainly I see my students able to very quickly find other images, other artists' images, and pulling images out of art history and so forth that could be a helpful learning tool, because it's so quickly immediate to them. But you're right, then they get very involved with being on their phone, and they don't understand. It's so frustrating for me, because as a visual artist, I mean, there's a reason why there's the word visual in front of the word artist, right? You're seeing, like you're not a musician, you're not, like another kind of artist, a dancer or so forth. We rely on our perception of the world around us physically to inform us, as far as giving us that kind of information that we respond to, that could fuel back into how we create our work. And like they don't get it. They don't understand that there's a world beyond the screen. Like there's a way of like looking at the world outside of the digital engagement that is important for visual artists to learn when they're students, as a learning thing. So I find that to be frustrating at times with people.
Yeah. Well, the thing about teaching is that the vast majority that I studied with were artists first,
Mhm.
and so the way I took teaching was to continue that tradition, and that you were hired because of what you do, and now teaching seems to have evolved into that they want you to teach something other than you do.
Mhm.
Which is funny, but maybe this is a good time to go to my website to see
Sure.
what is it that I do.
Yes, and I'm going to actually, let me see, I'm going to give you the control here so that you will be the host. You want to pull up your website on your computer, that way you can manipulate as you wish.
Okay, let me see if I can do that. Okay, I have.
I'm going to make